Citizen Way and Trampolines, Fight My Fight For Me. You're on 94.9. It is 4:15 and it's Tuesday afternoon. That means Creation Ministries International. And this afternoon we have Dr. John in the studio. Good afternoon, Dr. John.
Good afternoon, Nick.
It's good to see you again after, a little bit of time away.
Actually.
Yes. Now, let me just get your mic levels right. It's sounding a little bit weird. Say hello. Okay, I'm not sure what's going on there, but we'll work it out in just a moment. And could you say hello again?
Hello.
Yes, that sounds better. Yes, I had the wrong mic turned on. You're actually guest number 3 today, Dr. John, which is really exciting. Now, Dr. John, we had a question that came through last week. And it came through just a little bit late. And, of course, Michael Thompson from Creation Ministries International was here last week. And we were talking about free divers, which we've sort of touched on before over in Indonesia, these guys who dive down to like 70 metres and stay underwater for silly amounts of time, which, of course, we just can't do. But these guys, well, their families have been doing it for generations. And some people have been saying it's evolution. And, of course, we were talking about how it's sort of just natural selection, how these guys have become so good at diving and how things have changed. But one of the questions that came through was, in free diving, say going to 70 metres, what impact does it have on the body with the increase of pressure on the body?
Yeah, well, the impact is on all the spaces in your body that contain air, right? Mm-hmm. And the main ones are ears, sinuses, lungs, and intestines. They're the main ones. Now, you can create artificial ones if you put on goggles, for example. That gives you an artificial air-containing space around your eyes.
Right.
So what you've got to do when you're freediving is that the air in those spaces is going to be compressed. And if you're going to 70 metres, it's going to be about an eighth of its normal space occupants.
Wow.
So when I was doing it in the escape tank, we only had a 30-metre tank, mm-hmm. right? And that was okay. We used to wear goggles, but they were compensating goggles. Each side had a little round rubber balloon which contained air. So as you went down, the air in that balloon got compressed and filled up the goggles, so that you didn't get a suction effect on your eyes.
Yep.
But these people in Indonesia, of course, they I don't imagine they wear goggles. Mm-hmm. And the thing that they do have that has been part of their adaptation for it, they have very large spleens, mm-hmm. so that they contain a lot more blood in their spleens. That doesn't make any difference with their the depth that they go to, because spleens are incompressible. They don't contain air. Yep. What it does give them is it gives them a great deal more endurance. Now, mm-hmm. One of the tricks that we used to do in the escape tank was what was called a bottom drop. You know, you'd push yourself off and go down to the bottom, that's at 30 metres, and have a leisurely swim around the bottom and then come up a rope just for demonstration purposes to the visitors, mm-hmm. and that would take about about 2 minutes. Yep. And you'd get to the top and you'd pretend that you weren't out of breath, of course. Yeah. But these guys are doing it for far longer than that. Yep. But they are adapted to it. One of the problems that used to be thought was that if you went down much below 30 or 40 metres, then your lungs would get compressed and you might get some bleeding in your lungs, which is called a lung squeeze. Yep. Now, it's obvious that the 30 or 40 metres is not the limit for that, you know, and these Indonesian divers go much deeper, down to 70, but because they're acclimatised, they don't have any problems. But the average person who went down to 70 metres free diving, not being acclimatised, would probably get some lung damage by going to that depth. but it's the air-containing spaces that are the problems, not the solid body tissues. They don't get affected by that sort of depth.
Now, one thing I would have liked to have asked last week, but you weren't here. Of course, with the naval training that you guys did, were there guys that could do it like really easily that may have had some of these, I guess, enlarged spleen, that sort of thing? Were there guys that could just sort of, I guess, show off a little bit?
I don't think so, because we're only talking about 30 metres max. Then anybody could get acclimatised to that. I mean, I haven't got any huge spleen or anything like that, and I didn't find it difficult over time getting acclimatised to it. So, wow. Anybody can probably do 30 metres, but 70 might be a little bit more testing.
Pushing it. Okay. Now, Dr. John, I believe you've been on holidays and you got to see the 12 apostles.
Oh, yeah, I did. Well, there are still only 7.
Oh, sorry, there's 7 apostles.
Yeah, the other 5 have been martyred.
Wow.
By the surf.
Wow, so they took millions of years to create and they've all just fallen down in a couple of years.
No, Mick. Yeah, look, it definitely couldn't have taken them millions of years to create them, because...
being a little sarcastic.
I know you were, because not only down on the Great Ocean Road do you see the remains of the 12 apostles, but there's also the other structure that they call London Bridge, which was a very famous landmark down there.
Yep.
And that collapsed back in the 1990s, right? And one of the 12 apostles collapsed only about 10 or 15 years ago, So, but all over the world, the same sort of thing has been happening. Those sedimentary arches, there would be well more than a dozen, at least, in the year 2000s, all over the world, and pretty famous landmarks. So it's and the fact that they can all be collapsing in one person's lifetime, tells you that they could not possibly be millions of years old, which is what the world says they are.
Well, I mean, if there wasn't a giant flood, that's how long it could possibly have taken wind to carve them out like that, because what else could possibly do it other than water?
Yeah, well, that's right. I mean, water is what formed them in the first place, and water is what's eroded them in the second place. But it was great, and we got to Kangaroo Island as well. I'd always wanted to go there, and Kangaroo Island's got a coastline, obviously, pretty much like that too.
Yep.
So all of those sites, it's an absolute wonder to see all that sedimentary rock. It's just fantastic. But I learnt something on the trip about koalas. This is a very, very interesting thing, because they had some dreadful bushfires on Kangaroo Island only about 5 or 6 years ago. And they estimate that about 1 billion of the wildlife were killed.
Wow.
A huge number of koalas. And we didn't see too many kangaroos, and there's not much roadkill. So I think it's really been decimated.
Wow.
But the interesting thing about the koalas, and we saw this in Victoria as well, wherever you've got colonies of koalas, you've got to be careful that they don't breed to having too many there, because koalas kill the trees.
Right.
Everywhere you go where there are lots of koalas, you find lots of dead trees, because the koalas overgraze. They eat all the leaves, and once you've got all the leaves gone, the tree doesn't breathe anymore, so it dies.
Wow.
So you really can't afford to have too many koalas. So maybe natural selection has had bushfires in Australia for a long time and killed off a few, and kept the numbers down to manageable numbers.
Yeah, the trees would grow back then.
Well, the dead trees don't grow back, but the other trees do.
New ones do,
they grow because the fire's gone through. But it was really great. But good to be back, and good to be back on this program, because there was another thing that I really wanted to talk about today.
Yep.
I reread one of the books that I've got in my library about the authenticity of the book of Genesis, and by that the author really means the historical truth of all the things that are talked about in Genesis, and particularly in those early chapters. And of course, the main one is the flood, because that takes up 3 whole chapters in the early part of Genesis. And all of those events in Genesis have been the things that the critics have really been slinging off over years. The first thing they sling off, of course, is the creation itself, because the world doesn't want to believe in a creator God. So everything has to have just formed itself, as far as they're concerned. But that's not the only thing, of course. The other thing is the long ages of the patriarchs. You know, who lives to 900 years these days? Well, nobody. But we believe that you can substantiate that, and I'll talk about that when we come back.
Awesome. You're on 94.9. It is 26 minutes past 4, and we're with Dr. John from Creation Ministries International. If you have any questions, please send them through to our text line 0401 949 949.
Rhema CC.
And it is 22 minutes to 5. I have Dr. John in the studio from Creation Ministries International, and he's told us a little bit about his holiday, which sounded pretty cool, Dr. John, and now you're going to be talking to us about Genesis.
Well, yeah, particularly the flood, Beck, and some of the objections that the world has had to it. And I mean, not just the world, I suppose some Christians have wondered how people could possibly live to 900 years. And most of the patriarchs, and there's about 10 leading up from Adam to Noah, they all live for, nearly 900 years, so, yep. And Methuselah 969, which was quite a lot. And Noah was only 600 at the time of the flood, but he lived for another 350 years after that. Mm-hmm. Well, we find it pretty hard to get our head around ages like that. But when you sort of read between the lines, you can see how reasonable it is, because Adam was created perfect. He didn't have any genetic mutations or whatever. And for the first 10 or so generations, they wouldn't have had much at all. Mm. And it's only after the flood that you see the ages come down progressively, through 600, 400, 200, 180, that sort of thing, yep. Down to what we are now. And you can think of, well, what was that caused by? Well, obviously genetic deterioration would be one thing, because, yep. But I think, now you know me, Mick, I don't give climate change a great deal of credit for anything much, but mm-hmm. But I reckon it's probably had something to do with the deterioration in our lifespans.
Wow. Okay.
I'll give it credit for that, yep. Because quite clearly the climate after the flood has been completely different from what it was before.
Yep.
But look, the critics have also said that there are quite a number of 2 or 3 of the Middle Eastern clay tablets that talk about a great flood. And some of them have got fairly mythical type stories surrounding it. Mm. And all the critics have said, Moses got his ideas and put them together from all of these other stories. But when you read them, the only one that really makes any reasonable sense and sounds quite logical is the account that we read in the Bible. Mm. Certainly Moses got his. He probably did read some stories about it, but he would have also got it by tradition from the the line that came from Shem, who was Noah's son, of course, and Shem went through it. He was only born when Noah began to build the ark, and he was involved in building it. And he was 100 years old when the flood came. So, and he lived for another 500 years after it. Moses would have got all of those stories through the traditions that had been passed on through the line of Abraham. But the other interesting thing is the stories that include flood legends and ancestral accounts in so many different cultures throughout the world that never had any contact with the Middle East, never had, well, they've had contact with missionaries now, but they never did. And most of the missionaries were
You're saying
amazed.
no contact after the Tower of Babel type.
What the Bible tells us is that all cultures throughout the world have descended from the survivors of the ark, the 8 people.
Yep.
And the dispersion only happened 4 or 5 generations after that, when they started to build the Tower of Babel and God confounded their languages. Mm-hmm. So everybody on the face of the earth is descended from those 8 survivors of the flood. We are
all have the same story.
Yeah. But some of the stories are quite garbled, but it's interesting that a lot of them talk about how there was one favoured family, and that the reason the flood came was the wickedness of man, and that favoured family had been warned beforehand, and the most of the stories agree that they sent out birds to see how things were going. Mm-hmm. So many of the things that we read about in the Bible are hinted at in ancestral legends of all of the dispersed people throughout the world. It really is absolutely amazing. So there's no doubt that they all have a memory of their ancestors going through a great worldwide flood. Now, the critics would say that there never has been a worldwide flood. But, I mean, when you go along the Great Ocean Road and you see all that sedimentary rock, it's pretty obvious that the world's story about the ages of the sedimentary layers just doesn't make any sense. Yep. The only thing that makes sense is Noah's flood. And, of course, Noah's flood killed off all the animals, all the air-breathing life that wasn't on board the ark. And what do we find buried in the sediments? Then the bodies of those animals that were destroyed.
Yeah.
So really, when you look at what the Bible says, nothing that we see in the world makes any sense apart from what the Bible says. Now, Richard Dawkins has said nothing makes sense except in the light of evolution. Well, I'm sorry, Richard, but nothing makes sense except in the light of the Bible. And I think we can pretty safely say that. And, I mean, Christians really need to embrace exactly what Genesis says, because the New Testament confirms it as well. Not only does Jesus mention Noah and the flood, but when Luke gives Jesus' genealogy, he works back through Abraham and then through Noah and all the way back to Adam. And the list of patriarchs that Luke gives in reverse order is exactly the same as what we read in Genesis. So you've got to say that Luke was wrong if you want to say that Genesis is wrong. Now, it's a pretty brave Christian who's going to disagree with what the New Testament says, at least.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. And you were saying down on the island, Kangaroo Island, the layers, is it similar to what we see on the Hawkesbury sort of in that
sandstone?
sandstone?
Yeah. Well, we see all those layers in the cuttings and so on the M1 and down at the Hawkesbury, but they really stand out along the Great Ocean Road. And the coastline of that southern part of Australia, including Kangaroo Island, that is the most spectacular example that you'll see anywhere of the sedimentary rock layers. They really are fantastic.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, it seems we can travel pretty much planet-wide and we get to see that evidence. Yes. Well, Dr. John, how quick was that? It seems when you come back and you've been away for a while, it just flies. Time absolutely flies through. But you're back again next week, which is good news.
Yeah, no, it'll be great to be back again next week, Mick. And let me just encourage people to send through their questions because, if they utilise the text line, we're able to answer questions on air. And that's much better than me trying to work out what people might like to listen to. I'd much rather them tell me what they'd like to hear.
Absolutely. If you do have questions for Dr. John next week, please send them through to our text line 0401 949 949. If you're on 94.9 and